vulnerable and scared, Margaret, Sarah, and stood in the clearing with their children, left with nothing but thin blankets and the vast wilderness around them. The wagon train moved on, abandoning them to fend for themselves. No shelter, no food, just endless trees and open sky. They felt lost and desperate, unsure of what to do next. But then, through the forest, 3 Lakota warriors appeared, calm, strong, and observing their plight. They believed all hope was gone, but fate had other plans. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe in the power of unexpected allies. Margaret, Sarah, and Anne were 3 widows. They traveled with a wagon train heading west. They each had children. Their husbands had died in a tragic accident on the journey. The women were left alone, feeling lost and scared. They hoped to find a new life in the West, a place where they could start over. But now, they faced the reality of the wild without their husbands. They were vulnerable and unsure of what to do next. The wagon train was full of people looking for a fresh start. But when the accident happened, the group decided the widows were a burden. They could not afford to slow down for them. The decision was made to leave Margaret, Sarah, and their children behind. It was a harsh choice, but the others believed it was necessary for their own survival. The widows watched as the wagon train left them. Their hearts were heavy, and fear settled in. They stood alone in the vast wilderness, surrounded by trees and open sky. The children clung to their mothers, sensing the danger and uncertainty. The women knew they had to be strong for the children, even when they felt weak. Margaret was the oldest of the 3. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She knew they had to find food and shelter quickly. The wild was not forgiving, and they had little time. Margaret remembered the stories her husband used to tell about survival. She tried to recall every detail, every tip he had shared. She knew their lives depended on it. Sarah and Anne looked to Margaret for guidance. They trusted her, knowing she had a calm and steady presence. Together, they searched the area for anything they could use. They hoped to find a cave or a safe place to rest. But the land seemed endless, and they found nothing but trees and rocks. The children were hungry and scared. Their small faces were pale, and their eyes wide with fear. Margaret's heart ached as she watched them. She knew they had to keep moving, to keep searching, but she also knew they needed rest. The women decided to stop for a moment, to gather their strength. Margaret sat with the children, trying to comfort them. She told them stories, hoping to distract them from their hunger and fear. She spoke of brave explorers and adventures, of people who faced danger and survived. The children listened, their eyes growing heavy with sleep. For a brief moment, they forgot their worries. As night fell, the cold began to creep in. The women gathered closer, trying to keep warm. They had only thin blankets, hardly enough to protect them from the chill. Margaret wished for a fire, but they had no way to make one. They huddled together, sharing what little warmth they had. The darkness was thick, and the sounds of the forest surrounded them. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made them jump. Fear was a constant companion, but they knew they had to stay strong. The children needed them to be brave. In the night, Margaret thought of her husband. She missed his strength, his comforting presence. She wished he were there to guide them, but she knew she had to rely on herself now. She had to be strong for her children, for Sarah and Anne. The night passed slowly, and the morning brought no relief. The cold was still there, and the hunger gnawed at them. The women knew they had to find food. They set out again, searching for anything edible. They looked for berries, roots, anything that could sustain them. But the land was harsh and unforgiving. They found little to eat, and their spirits sank. Margaret tried to keep hope alive, to reassure Sarah and Anne. But doubt began to creep in. She wondered if they could survive, if they could find a way out of this. The children were growing weaker, their energy fading. Margaret felt a pang of fear each time she looked at them. She knew they had to find help, but she didn't know where to turn. The wilderness was vast, and they were just a small group, lost in its expanse. As the day wore on, their situation grew more desperate. The women knew they couldn't go on like this. They needed food, warmth, and shelter. But most of all, they needed hope. Margaret knew they had to keep moving, to keep searching for a way out. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. The women found a small clearing and decided to rest for the night. They gathered the children close, trying to keep them warm. Margaret felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She thought of her husband's words, his belief in her strength. She knew she had to dig deep to find that strength within herself. She had to lead them to find a way to survive. The night was long, and the cold unyielding. But Margaret held on to hope, even when it seemed impossible. The next morning, they set out again, their steps heavy with exhaustion. The children were quiet, their energy drained. Margaret knew they had to find help soon. They couldn't go on like this much longer. As they walked, Margaret spotted something in the distance. It was a small group of figures moving through the trees. Her heart leapt with a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know who they were, if they were friend or foe. But she knew they had no choice. They had to take the chance to seek help from these strangers. Margaret signaled to Sarah and Anne, pointing to the figures. The women gathered the children, preparing to approach. Their hearts were filled with fear, but also a glimmer of hope. They knew this might be their only chance for survival. As they moved closer, the figures came into focus. They were 3 men, dressed in clothing unlike anything the women had seen before. They appeared cautious but curious, watching the group approach. Margaret took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. She hoped to show that they meant no harm, that they were in need of help. The men paused, their eyes on the women and children. A tense silence hung in the air, as both groups waited to see what would happen next. Margaret felt the weight of the moment, knowing their lives depended on it. She hoped these strangers would offer help, that they would see their desperation. She stood tall, trying to project strength and resolve, even as fear coursed through her veins. The 3 men exchanged glances, speaking in low voices. Margaret watched them closely, hoping for a sign of understanding. She knew they had to be patient, to show respect and gratitude. Their future hung in the balance, and she prayed for a miracle. In that moment, Margaret knew they had reached a turning point. They stood on the edge of an uncertain future, with only hope and courage to guide them. The wilderness was vast and unforgiving, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. Margaret, Sarah, and Anne stood in the clearing. The 3 Lakota men were still watching them. There was a pause, a moment of waiting. Margaret felt her heart beating fast, her mind racing. She knew they needed help, but she had no idea if these men would offer it. As the moments passed, the men slowly turned and walked back into the trees. Margaret felt a rush of fear. She feared they had lost their chance. But then, one of the men turned back and gestured for them to follow. Relief washed over Margaret. It was a sign of hope, a small light in their dark situation. The women gathered the children. They followed the men through the trees, staying close together. The forest was thick and the path was narrow. Margaret kept her eyes on the men, watching their every move. She felt a mix of hope and fear, unsure of what lay ahead. The group walked for some time. They came upon a small clearing with a camp. There were several tents and a fire burning in the center. The smell of food filled the air, making Margaret's stomach ache with hunger. The Lakota men gestured for the women and children to sit by the fire. Margaret felt a mix of gratitude and caution. She didn't know much about these people, but she was thankful for their help. They were offering food and warmth, things they desperately needed. The children sat close to the fire, their eyes wide with curiosity. As they sat by the fire, Margaret remembered her life before the journey. She thought of her home and her husband. They had a simple life, filled with love and laughter. But the journey west had changed everything. Now, she faced a new reality, one filled with uncertainty and danger. Sarah and Anne sat beside her, their faces weary. They too were lost in thought, remembering their past lives. The journey had taken so much from them, but they had to keep moving forward. They had to find a way to survive, for their children's sake. The Lakota men brought food to the group. It was simple, but it smelled delicious. The women and children ate gratefully, feeling their strength return with each bite. Margaret felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could find a way through this. Maybe they could survive. As they ate, a storm began to brew. The sky darkened, and the wind picked up. Margaret felt the chill of the air, a reminder of their precarious situation. They had only thin blankets and little protection from the elements. The storm added to their desperation, making their need for help even more urgent. The Lakota men watched the storm with calm eyes. Margaret sensed their confidence, their understanding of the land. She knew they were not afraid, that they had faced storms before. She hoped to learn from them to gain some of their strength and knowledge. As the storm raged, tensions rose. The children were frightened, and the women felt the strain. They had to keep their spirits high, to find a way to stay positive. Margaret tried her best to reassure them, but doubts began to creep in. She wondered if they could truly survive in this wild place. The land was harsh and they were unprepared. The storm was a reminder of their vulnerability, of the challenges they faced. But Margaret knew they had to keep going. They had to find a way, for the sake of their children. The storm passed, leaving the camp wet and cold. The women huddled together, sharing stories of hope. Margaret spoke of her husband, of his belief in her strength. She told them they could survive, that they had the courage to face whatever came next. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. As the night fell, the group settled in for rest. The Lakota men kept watch, their eyes scanning the darkness. Margaret felt a sense of security, knowing they were protected. She knew they were not out of danger, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. In the darkness, Margaret thought of their journey. It had been long and hard, filled with loss and fear, but she knew they had to keep moving forward. They had to find a way to survive, to create a new life. The wilderness was vast and unforgiving, but she believed they could find a way through. The night was cold, but the fire provided warmth. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their small bodies close to hers. Their breathing was steady, a reminder of their innocence. She knew she had to protect them, to keep them safe. It was a heavy burden, but one she carried with love. As the sun rose, the camp began to stir. The Lakota men prepared breakfast, sharing their food with the group. The women and children ate gratefully, feeling their strength return. Margaret felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could survive. The day was bright, and the storm had passed. The group gathered their things, ready to move on. The Lakota men gestured for them to follow, to continue their journey together. Margaret felt a sense of gratitude, knowing they had found allies. They were not alone in the wilderness. The path was clear and the group moved forward. Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to survive. She knew the journey would be hard, but she believed in their strength. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. The wilderness was vast and unyielding, but Margaret felt hope. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. The future was uncertain, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would create a new life, a new beginning. The morning sun rose over the camp, casting a soft light on the clearing. Margaret, Sarah, and woke with the children, feeling the cool air on their faces. The storm had passed, leaving the ground damp and the air fresh. The Lakota men, Chayton, Dakota, and Wakasa, were already awake, preparing for the day ahead. The women felt a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. They were thankful for the help they had received, but they were unsure of what lay ahead. They knew they had to keep moving, to find a place where they could settle and survive. The wilderness was vast, and their journey was far from over. As they prepared to leave, the Lakota men spoke among themselves, their voices low and calm. Margaret watched them, sensing their strength and confidence. She knew they were skilled in navigating the land, and she hoped to learn from them. She felt a glimmer of hope, believing they could find a way through the challenges they faced. The group set out, moving through the forest with purpose. The path was narrow, and the trees were thick around them. Margaret kept her eyes on the Lakota men, following their lead. She knew they had to move quickly to find a safe place before nightfall. As they walked, Margaret thought of the journey ahead. She knew it would be hard, but she believed they could survive. They had found allies in the Lakota men, people who understood the land. With their help, she hoped to find a place where they could build a new life. The children walked alongside their mothers, their eyes wide with curiosity. They were tired but hopeful, sensing the possibility of a better future. Margaret felt their energy, their innocence, and she knew she had to protect them. It was a heavy responsibility, but one she carried with love. As the day wore on, the group came upon a river. The water was clear and cool, a welcome sight in the wilderness. The Lakota men gestured for the group to stop, to rest by the riverbank. Margaret felt a sense of relief, knowing they had found a safe place to pause. The women and children gathered by the river, grateful for the chance to rest. They drank the cool water, feeling refreshed and renewed. Margaret watched the Lakota men as they moved with ease, their actions deliberate and confident. She felt a sense of admiration, knowing they had much to learn from them. As they rested, a sense of peace settled over the group. The sound of the river was soothing, a reminder of the beauty of the land. Margaret felt a flicker of hope, believing they could find a way to survive. They had allies, people who could guide them. But as the day wore on, Margaret felt a sense of unease. She knew they were not alone in the wilderness, that dangers lurked in the shadows. The Lakota men seemed to sense it too, their eyes scanning the trees. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine, knowing they had to be cautious. As they prepared to move on, Chayton, the leader of the Lakota men, gestured for Margaret to approach. His eyes were calm but serious, and Margaret sensed the weight of the moment. She stepped forward, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Chayton spoke in a low voice, his words unfamiliar but his tone clear. He pointed to the trees, then to the ground, his gestures deliberate and clear. Margaret understood his message. They had to be careful, to watch for signs of danger. She nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She knew they had to stay alert to protect the children and each other. The wilderness was vast and unyielding, but she believed they could find a way through. The group moved on, their steps cautious and deliberate. Margaret felt a sense of tension, knowing they had to be vigilant. The Lakota men led the way, their eyes scanning the land. Margaret followed closely, feeling the weight of their situation. As the sun began to set, the group came upon a small clearing. It was a safe place to rest, and the Lakota men gestured for the group to stop. Margaret felt a sense of relief, knowing they had found a place to pause for the night. The women and children gathered in the clearing, their exhaustion evident. They were tired but hopeful, believing they could find a way to survive. Margaret felt a sense of gratitude, knowing they had allies who could help them. As night fell, the group settled in for rest. The Lakota men kept watch, their eyes scanning the darkness. Margaret felt a sense of security, knowing they were protected. She knew they were not out of danger, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. In the darkness, Margaret thought of their journey. It had been long and hard, filled with loss and fear, but she knew they had to keep moving forward. They had to find a way to survive, to create a new life. The wilderness was vast and unforgiving, but she believed they could find a way through. The night was cold, but the fire provided warmth. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their small bodies close to hers. Their breathing was steady, a reminder of their innocence. She knew she had to protect them, to keep them safe. It was a heavy burden, but one she carried with love. As the sun rose, the camp began to stir. The Lakota men prepared breakfast, sharing their food with the group. The women and children ate gratefully, feeling their strength return. Margaret felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could survive. The day was bright, and the storm had passed. The group gathered their things, ready to move on. The Lakota men gestured for them to follow, to continue their journey together. Margaret felt a sense of gratitude, knowing they had found allies. They were not alone in the wilderness. The path was clear and the group moved forward. Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to survive. She knew the journey would be hard, but she believed in their strength. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. The wilderness was vast and unyielding, but Margaret felt hope. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. The future was uncertain, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would create a new life, a new beginning. The sun rose over the forest, casting light on the small camp. Margaret, Sarah, and Ann woke up slowly. The children stirred beside them, rubbing sleep from their eyes. The Lakota men, Chayton, Dakota, and Wakasa, were already awake. They were busy tending to the campfire, preparing breakfast for everyone. Margaret felt thankful for their help. The Lakota men had been kind and generous. They had shared their food and offered guidance. But there was still a feeling of tension. The two groups spoke different languages and came from different worlds. Communication was difficult, and misunderstandings happened. Chayton approached Margaret with a piece of bread. He gestured for her to eat. Margaret nodded, accepting the food with gratitude. She understood his gesture, even without words. It was a simple act of kindness, but it meant a lot. She knew she could trust him and his friends. The children gathered around, eager for breakfast. Their faces were bright, their spirits lifted by the food and warmth. Sarah and Ann joined them, sharing the meal with quiet gratitude. They knew they had found allies in the Lakota men, people who could help them survive. After breakfast, the group prepared to move on. The Lakota men led the way, guiding them through the forest. Margaret watched them closely, trying to learn. She wanted to understand their ways, to become self-reliant. They had much to teach, and she was eager to learn. Chayton showed Margaret how to find edible plants. He pointed to different leaves and roots, explaining with gestures. Margaret watched carefully, memorizing his movements. She knew this knowledge could save their lives. It was important to learn and adapt. Dakota taught Sarah and Ann how to set traps for small animals. He used branches and stones, creating simple but effective traps. The women watched, their eyes wide with interest. They knew these skills were crucial for survival. The forest was full of resources, if only they knew how to use them. The children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the trees. They were happy, enjoying the freedom of the wilderness. They watched the Lakota men with curiosity, eager to learn. The men were patient, showing them how to make simple toys from sticks and leaves. As the day went on, a sense of trust began to form. The Lakota men were no longer strangers. They were allies, teachers, and friends. The women felt a bond growing, a connection based on shared experiences. They were learning to communicate, to understand each other without words. Margaret felt a sense of hope. She knew they were not alone. They had found people who could help them, who could teach them to survive. The wilderness was still vast and unyielding, but it no longer seemed impossible. They had allies, and together they could face anything. As the sun began to set, the group found a safe place to camp. The Lakota men set up a fire, and everyone gathered around. The warmth was comforting, a reminder of their shared journey. They were a small community, bound together by necessity and trust. Margaret sat with Chayton watching the fire. She felt a sense of peace, knowing they had found a way forward. They had learned to trust each other, to communicate without words. Their bond was growing, a testament to their shared struggle. The night was calm, and the stars shone brightly in the sky. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could find a way to survive. In the morning, the group prepared to move on. They gathered their things, ready to face the challenges ahead. Margaret felt a sense of determination, a belief in their strength. She knew the journey would be hard, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. The path was clear and the group moved forward. Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to survive. She knew the wilderness was vast and unyielding, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would create a new life, a new beginning. The day was bright, and the future was uncertain. But Margaret felt hope, a belief in their strength and resilience. They had learned to trust, to communicate, and to survive. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. The morning sun warmed the clearing as the group prepared for another day. Margaret, Sarah, and Anne felt more confident now. They had learned so much from the Lakota men. Their survival skills were improving, and they felt more at ease in the wilderness. The children seemed happier too, playing and learning from their new friends. Chayton, Lakota, and Wakasa continued to teach the women and children. They showed them how to gather food, hunt, and navigate the land. Margaret watched closely, eager to learn everything she could. She wanted to be strong, to protect her children and friends. Chayton demonstrated how to find edible plants. He pointed to leaves and berries, showing which were safe to eat. Margaret memorized his movements, repeating them with care. She knew this knowledge was vital for their survival. It was a skill she was determined to master. Lakota helped Sarah and Anne with hunting. He showed them how to track animals and set traps. The women were nervous at first, but they quickly grew more confident. They learned to move quietly, to watch for signs of wildlife. It was hard work, but they were determined to succeed. The children watched and learned too. They followed the Lakota men, their eyes wide with curiosity. Wakasa taught them simple games and songs, sharing his culture with them. The children were eager to learn, absorbing everything like sponges. Their laughter filled the air, a reminder of their innocence and resilience. As the days passed, the group settled into a routine. They worked together, each person contributing to the tasks. Margaret felt a sense of community, a feeling of belonging she hadn't expected. The wilderness was still vast and challenging, but they were no longer afraid. With each passing day, their bond with the Lakota men grew stronger. They communicated through gestures and simple words, finding ways to understand each other. It was a slow process, but it was rewarding. They were learning from each other, sharing knowledge and experiences. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude. The Lakota men had saved them, offering help when they needed it most. They had shared their skills, their food, and their friendship. Margaret knew they wouldn't have survived without them. She felt a strong connection, a bond that went beyond words. One day, while foraging, Margaret spotted a small animal caught in a trap. It was a rabbit, its eyes wide with fear. Margaret hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then she remembered Lakota's teachings. She approached slowly, speaking softly to the frightened creature. With gentle hands, Margaret freed the rabbit from the trap. It darted away, disappearing into the underbrush. Margaret felt a sense of accomplishment, a small victory in their struggle for survival. She knew she was learning, growing stronger every day. The group continued to work together, facing challenges with determination. They learned to adapt, to find solutions to problems. The wilderness was still harsh, but they were becoming more skilled, more resourceful. They were learning to trust themselves and each other. The Lakota men taught them how to read the land, to understand the signs of nature. They learned to predict the weather, to find shelter from storms. Margaret felt a sense of empowerment, a belief in their ability to survive. They were no longer just surviving, they were thriving. As the sun set, the group gathered around the fire. They shared stories of the day, laughing and talking. The children played nearby, their faces glowing in the firelight. Margaret felt a sense of peace, a feeling of contentment. They had come so far, and she was proud of what they had achieved. The night was calm, and the stars shone brightly above. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the morning, the group prepared to move on. They gathered their things, ready to face the challenges ahead. Margaret felt a sense of determination, a belief in their strength. She knew the journey would be hard, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. The path was clear and the group moved forward. Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to survive. She knew the wilderness was vast and unyielding, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would create a new life, a new beginning. The day was bright, and the future was uncertain. But Margaret felt hope, a belief in their strength and resilience. They had learned to trust, to communicate, and to survive. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. The sun rose over the camp, casting a warm glow on the group. Margaret and the others prepared for the day, gathering their supplies. The children played nearby, their laughter bright in the morning air. They had settled into a routine, feeling more at ease in the wilderness. But as the group prepared to move on, Sarah noticed something was wrong. Her youngest child, Emily, was listless and pale. Sarah felt a rush of fear, sensing the seriousness of the situation. Margaret and Anne gathered around, their faces filled with concern. Emily's breathing was shallow, her small body weak. Margaret felt a pang of fear, knowing they had to act quickly. She remembered Chaitin's knowledge of medicine, his skill in healing. She turned to him, her eyes filled with desperation. Chaitin approached Emily, his expression calm but focused. He knelt beside the child, examining her with care. His hands were gentle, his touch reassuring. Margaret watched, her heart heavy with worry. She knew they had to trust him, to hope for a miracle. Chaitin spoke to Lakota and Wakasa, their voices low and serious. They gathered herbs and plants, preparing a remedy for Emily. Margaret watched them work, feeling a mix of fear and hope. She knew they were skilled, that they had saved lives before. Sarah sat beside Emily, holding her daughter's hand. Her eyes were filled with tears, her heart aching with worry. Margaret and Anne offered comfort, their presence a source of strength. They knew they had to be strong, to support each other through this crisis. Chaitin prepared a poultice, using the herbs and plants he had gathered. He applied it to Emily's forehead, murmuring softly as he worked. Margaret watched his actions, feeling a sense of awe. His skill and knowledge were a lifeline, a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. The day passed slowly, each moment filled with tension. Emily lay still, her breathing shallow but steady. Margaret felt the weight of worry pressing down on her, but she refused to give up hope. She knew they had to be patient, to trust in Chaitin's skills. As evening fell, Emily's condition began to improve. Her breathing grew stronger, and her color returned. Margaret felt a rush of relief, a sense of gratitude filling her heart. Chaitin's medicine had worked, bringing Emily back from the brink. Sarah wept with joy, holding her daughter close. Margaret and Anne felt tears of relief in their own eyes. The crisis had passed, leaving them stronger and more united. They had faced the fear of loss and emerged victorious. Chaitin watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. His skill and compassion had saved Emily, strengthening the bond between the two groups. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they owed him so much. The night was calm, the air filled with a sense of peace. The group gathered around the fire, sharing stories and laughter. They had faced a great challenge and had emerged stronger. Their bond was deeper, their trust in each other unshakable. Margaret felt a sense of hope, a belief in their ability to survive. They had learned to trust, to rely on each other in times of need. The wilderness was still vast and unyielding, but they were no longer afraid. They had allies, people who could help them. As the stars shone brightly above, Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had faced fear and uncertainty and had emerged stronger. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the morning, the group prepared to move on. They gathered their things, ready to face the challenges ahead. Margaret felt a sense of determination, a belief in their strength. She knew the journey would be hard, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. The path was clear and the group moved forward. Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to survive. She knew the wilderness was vast and unyielding, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would create a new life, a new beginning. The day was bright, and the future was uncertain. But Margaret felt hope, a belief in their strength and resilience. They had learned to trust, to communicate, and to survive. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. The sun rose, casting a gentle light over the camp. The group stirred, ready to face another day. Margaret, Sarah, and Ann felt a renewed sense of strength. They had overcome a great challenge with Emily's illness, and their bond with the Lakota men had deepened. Trust had grown between them, and the women felt more hopeful about the future. As the morning unfolded, Margaret found herself reflecting on her relationship with Chayton. Their connection had grown stronger since the day he saved Emily. They often sat together, sharing stories of their pasts. Margaret spoke of her husband and the life she had left behind. Chayton listened with understanding, sharing his own experiences of loss and hope. Their conversations were simple, filled with gestures and smiles. Words were not always needed. They found common ground in their shared experiences, their mutual respect growing. Margaret felt comforted by Chayton's presence, his quiet strength reassuring her. Sarah and Ann also felt a growing friendship with Lakota and Wakasa. The men were patient teachers, showing them how to live off the land. The women had learned to hunt, to gather food, and to read the signs of nature. Their confidence was growing, their skills improving. They felt more at home in the wilderness, less afraid of its challenges. The children had formed a strong bond with the Lakota men. They followed them eagerly, learning about the world around them. Wakasa taught them games and songs, sharing his culture with joy. The children's laughter was a constant presence, a reminder of the resilience of youth. As the group traveled, they faced new challenges. The land was vast and sometimes unforgiving. There were days when food was scarce or the weather turned cold. But they faced these challenges together, each person contributing to the group's survival. The women and children had become part of the Lakota community, their bonds deepening with each passing day. One afternoon, as they rested by a stream, Margaret and Chayton sat together. The sound of the water was soothing, a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Margaret spoke of her hopes for the future, her dreams of finding a place where they could settle. Chayton listened, nodding in understanding. He spoke of his own hopes, his vision of a life built on trust and community. Their conversation was interrupted by the laughter of the children. They were playing nearby, their joy infectious. Margaret watched them, her heart full of warmth. She knew they had found a new family, a new home in the wilderness. As the sun set, the group gathered around the fire. They shared stories, their voices mingling in the night air. The women spoke of their journey, of the challenges they had faced. The Lakota men shared tales of their own, stories of their people and their land. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the group. They were a community, united by their shared experiences. Margaret felt a sense of belonging, a feeling she had not expected to find. She knew they had come far, but their journey was not over. There were still challenges ahead, but she felt ready to face them. The night was calm, and the stars shone brightly above. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the morning, the group prepared to move on. They gathered their things, ready to face the challenges ahead. Margaret felt a sense of determination, a belief in their strength. She knew the journey would be hard, but they were not alone. They had allies, people who could help them. The path was clear and the group moved forward. Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to survive. She knew the wilderness was vast and unyielding, but she believed they could find a way through. Together, they would create a new life, a new beginning. The day was bright, and the future was uncertain. But Margaret felt hope, a belief in their strength and resilience. They had learned to trust, to communicate, and to survive. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival. The sun rose on another day, casting light on the path ahead. The group prepared to continue their journey. Margaret, Sarah, and Anne felt stronger with each passing day. They had learned to trust their instincts, to rely on each other and the Lakota men. They had become a tight-knit community, bound by their shared experiences and mutual respect. The morning was brisk, and the group moved with purpose. They followed the Lakota men, who led them through the forest with confidence. Margaret felt grateful for their guidance, their knowledge of the land a lifeline for the group. They had learned so much, but there was still more to discover. As they walked, Margaret thought about their future. She knew they had to make a decision soon. They could continue their journey west or stay with the Lakota. It was a choice that weighed heavily on her mind. Both options had risks and benefits, and she wanted to make the right choice for the children. The day wore on, and the group stopped to rest by a river. They gathered together, sharing a simple meal. The children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the trees. Margaret watched them, her heart full of love. She knew they needed stability, a place to call home. As they rested, Chayton approached Margaret. His expression was serious, and Margaret sensed he had something important to discuss. They stepped away from the group, finding a quiet spot by the water. Margaret felt a mix of anticipation and uncertainty, unsure of what Chayton would say. Chayton spoke, his words slow and deliberate. He gestured to the land around them, to the river and the trees. Margaret listened carefully, trying to understand his message. He was offering them a choice, a chance to stay with the Lakota. They could become part of the community, finding safety and belonging. Margaret felt a rush of emotions. It was a generous offer, one that filled her with gratitude. She thought about the journey ahead, the uncertainty of traveling west. Staying with the Lakota meant safety, a chance to build a new life. But it was also a big decision, one that required careful consideration. The group gathered that evening to discuss their options. Margaret shared Chayton's offer, explaining the choice they faced. Sarah and Anne listened intently, their expressions thoughtful. They knew this decision would shape their future, and they wanted to make the right choice. The conversation was serious, each woman weighing the risks and benefits. Traveling west meant uncertainty, but it also meant staying true to their original goal. Staying with the Lakota meant safety and community, but it required adapting to a new way of life. As the discussion unfolded, Margaret realized the importance of their bond with the Lakota. They had become friends, allies in the wilderness. The Lakota had shared their knowledge, their culture, their way of life. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they owed so much to these men. The decision was not easy, but as the night wore on, a sense of clarity emerged. The women knew what was best for their children, for their future. They would stay with the Lakota, choosing safety and community over uncertainty. It was a choice filled with hope, a belief in their ability to adapt and thrive. The next morning, the group prepared for a new beginning. The Lakota welcomed them with open arms, embracing them as part of the community. A ceremony was held to mark their decision, a celebration of their new life together. Margaret felt a sense of belonging, a feeling she had longed for since the journey began. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. The women and children were welcomed with open arms, their presence celebrated by the community. Margaret felt a deep sense of peace, knowing they had made the right choice. They had found a home, a place where they could heal and grow. As the sun set, Margaret stood with Chayton, watching the sky change colors. She felt a sense of hope, a belief in their future. They had faced many challenges, but they had emerged stronger. Together, they would build a new life, rooted in love and community. The night was calm, and the stars shone brightly above. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the days that followed, the group settled into their new life. They learned more about the Lakota culture, embracing their new community. The women contributed to the tasks, learning new skills and sharing their own. The children thrived, their laughter a constant reminder of their resilience. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they had found a home. They had chosen a path of hope and belonging, one filled with promise. The future was bright, and Margaret felt ready to embrace it. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their journey of survival and growth. The days passed peacefully in the Lakota camp. Margaret, Sarah, and Ann had found a rhythm in their new life. They contributed to the community, learning and working alongside the Lakota people. The children had adapted well, making friends and playing freely in the open spaces. One morning, as the sun rose over the camp, a sense of unease stirred among the group. Chayton and the other Lakota men noticed signs of disturbance in the nearby forest. Tracks and broken branches suggested predators might be near. Margaret sensed the tension, seeing the seriousness in Chayton's eyes. The group gathered to discuss the threat. Chayton explained the situation, using gestures and simple words. Margaret understood the danger. Predators could threaten their safety, especially the children. They had to be cautious and ready to protect their camp. Margaret felt a mix of fear and determination. She knew they had to act quickly. The wilderness was beautiful but unpredictable. It was important to prepare for whatever might come. The community came together, each person ready to contribute to their defense. Chayton and the Lakota men began to teach the group defensive strategies. They showed them how to fortify the camp, creating barriers with fallen branches and stones. The women and children helped gather materials, working together to strengthen their defenses. Margaret watched and learned, her mind focused on the task at hand. She felt a sense of purpose, knowing they were working to protect their home. The community moved with determination, each person understanding the importance of their role. Lakota and Wakasa taught the women how to use simple tools as weapons. They showed them how to create makeshift spears and bows, using materials from the forest. Sarah and Ann practiced with focus, their confidence growing with each lesson. The children were kept close, their safety a top priority. They watched the adults work, sensing the seriousness of the situation. Even in their innocence, they understood the need for caution. Margaret felt a pang of worry, but she knew they were doing everything possible to keep them safe. As the day wore on, the group worked tirelessly. They set traps around the perimeter, hoping to deter any predators that might approach. Chayton and the other men kept watch, their eyes scanning the forest for signs of danger. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude for their vigilance. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the camp. Margaret felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. They had done all they could to prepare, and now they had to wait. She knew the night would be long, filled with tension and uncertainty. As darkness fell, the community gathered around the fire. They shared a simple meal, their voices low and calm. The children huddled close, their faces reflecting the flickering flames. Margaret felt a sense of unity, a belief in their strength as a group. The night was quiet, the forest still and watchful. Margaret lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of the threat. She listened to the sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves and the call of distant animals. She knew they had to be ready to protect what they had built. Chayton and the other men kept watch, their presence a source of comfort. Margaret felt a sense of security, knowing they were not alone. They had allies, people who understood the land and its dangers. Together, they could face whatever came next. The hours passed slowly, each moment filled with tension. But as the sun began to rise, the sense of threat began to fade. The night had passed without incident, and the camp was safe. Margaret felt a rush of relief, a belief that they could protect their home. In the light of the new day, the community gathered to assess their situation. Chayton and the other men checked the traps, ensuring their defenses were still strong. The women and children helped, their spirits lifted by the new day. Margaret felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing they had faced the threat with courage and unity. The morning was bright, and the danger seemed distant. The community returned to their daily tasks, their confidence renewed. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they had come together to protect their home. They had faced the unknown and emerged stronger. As the day wore on, the group continued their work. They fortified their defenses, ensuring their safety for the future. Margaret felt a sense of peace, knowing they were ready for whatever might come. They were a community, bound by trust and resilience. The sun set on another day, casting a warm glow over the camp. Margaret stood with Chayton watching the sky change colors. She felt a sense of hope, a belief in their future. They had faced many challenges, but they had emerged stronger. Together, they would protect their home and build a new life. The night was calm, and the stars shone brightly above. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next, united in their struggle for survival and growth. The sun rose gently over the camp, signaling the start of a new day. The community stirred to life, each person ready to face the tasks ahead. Margaret felt a sense of calm as she woke, knowing they had successfully protected their home. The threat had passed, and the group felt stronger for having faced it together. Chayton and the other Lakota men gathered to discuss the future. The recent events had brought the community closer, their bonds deepened by the shared challenge. Margaret felt grateful for the unity they had found. The wilderness was still vast and unpredictable, but they were no longer afraid. As the morning unfolded, Margaret found herself thinking about the future. The group had settled into a routine, each person contributing to the well-being of the camp. They had built a new life, rooted in trust and cooperation. But Margaret knew there were still decisions to be made about their long-term plans. The group gathered around the fire to discuss their next steps. Chayton spoke first, his voice calm and steady. He suggested they consider expanding their camp, creating a more permanent settlement. It was a bold idea, one that filled Margaret with excitement and hope. Sarah and Anne listened intently, their expressions thoughtful. They knew this decision would shape their future, and they wanted to make the right choice. The idea of building a permanent home was appealing, offering stability and security for their children. The conversation unfolded, each person sharing their thoughts and hopes. The women spoke of their desire for a place where their children could grow up safely. The Lakota men shared their knowledge of the land, offering guidance on how to establish a lasting settlement. Margaret felt a sense of possibility, a belief in their ability to create something lasting. They had come so far, facing challenges with courage and determination. The idea of building a home was a natural next step, a chance to solidify their future. As the discussion continued, a sense of excitement filled the air. The group talked about the practicalities of building a settlement, the resources they would need. Chayton and the other men offered to teach the women new skills, ensuring everyone could contribute to the effort. The children listened with wide eyes, sensing the importance of the moment. They were eager to help, their energy and enthusiasm infectious. Margaret felt a deep sense of pride, knowing they were creating a future for their children. The decision was made to establish a permanent settlement. The group felt a sense of unity, a commitment to their shared goal. Margaret knew it would not be easy, but she felt ready to face the challenges ahead. They had allies, skills, and a strong sense of community. The days that followed were filled with hard work and cooperation. The group began to clear land for their new settlement, working together to prepare the site. They gathered materials from the forest, using their knowledge of the land to guide their efforts. Margaret felt a sense of purpose as she worked alongside the others. She learned new skills, gaining confidence with each task. The Lakota men were patient teachers, sharing their expertise with generosity and care. The women contributed their own skills, ensuring the settlement met the needs of the community. They shared ideas and solutions, working together to overcome obstacles. Margaret felt a sense of pride in their achievements, knowing they were building something lasting. As the settlement began to take shape, the group felt a sense of accomplishment. They had created a place where they could thrive, a home filled with hope and promise. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they had found a new beginning. The community gathered one evening to celebrate their progress. The fire crackled warmly, its light casting a glow over the group. They shared a meal, their voices filled with laughter and joy. Margaret felt a sense of belonging, a feeling of home. Chayton sat beside her, his presence a source of comfort. Margaret felt a connection to him, a bond forged through their shared journey. She knew they had found more than just a home. They had found family. The night was calm, and the stars shone brightly above. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the days that followed, the settlement continued to grow. The community worked together, each person contributing to the common goal. Margaret felt a sense of peace, knowing they had built a new life. The future was bright, and she felt ready to embrace it. The sun set on another day, casting a warm glow over the settlement. Margaret stood with Chayton watching the sky change colors. She felt a sense of hope, a belief in their future. They had faced many challenges, but they had emerged stronger. Together, they would protect their home and build a new life. The sun rose over the new settlement, bringing warmth and light to the day. Margaret stood outside her shelter, watching the camp come to life. The sounds of the morning filled the air, the laughter of children, the gentle clatter of work beginning. It was a peaceful scene, one that filled her heart with contentment. The community had grown closer since deciding to establish a permanent home. The Lakota men and the women worked side by side, their efforts creating a strong and united group. Margaret felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling she had longed for since the beginning of their journey. As the day unfolded, Margaret reflected on their progress. They had faced many challenges, but they had overcome them together. The settlement was thriving, a testament to their hard work and determination. Margaret felt proud of what they had accomplished, knowing they had built more than just shelters. They had built a community. The children played nearby, their laughter a constant presence. They had adapted well to their new life, embracing the freedom and adventure of the wilderness. Margaret watched them fondly, her heart full of love. They were happy and healthy, thriving in their new environment. Chayton approached Margaret, his expression warm and welcoming. They often spent time together, sharing stories and dreams for the future. Margaret felt a deep connection to him, a bond that had grown over time. They had found common ground, their shared experiences bringing them closer. As they talked, Margaret spoke of her hopes for the settlement. She dreamed of a place where everyone could thrive, a community built on trust and cooperation. Chayton nodded, sharing her vision of a future filled with promise. Together, they planned for the days ahead, their hearts united in purpose. The day was filled with activity, each person contributing to the well-being of the community. The women tended to the gardens, ensuring a steady supply of food. The men worked on fortifying the settlement, using their knowledge of the land to guide their efforts. The children helped where they could, eager to learn and contribute. Margaret felt a sense of peace as she worked alongside her friends. They had come so far, their journey filled with challenges and triumphs. The wilderness had tested them, but it had also brought them together. They were no longer strangers. They were family. As the sun began to set, the community gathered for a shared meal. The fire crackled warmly, its light casting a glow over the group. They shared stories and laughter, their voices mingling in the night air. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they had found a home. After the meal, the group sat together, watching the stars appear in the sky. The night was calm, the air filled with a sense of peace. Margaret looked around at the faces of her friends, feeling a profound sense of belonging. They had built something special, a place where they could all thrive. Chayton sat beside Margaret, his presence comforting and reassuring. She felt a deep connection to him, a bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. They had faced many challenges together, their shared journey bringing them closer. Margaret knew they had a bright future ahead. They had built a strong foundation, one rooted in trust and cooperation. The settlement was more than just a place to live. It was a home, filled with love and hope. The night wore on, and the stars shone brightly above. Margaret lay with the children, feeling their warmth beside her. She knew they had a long journey ahead, but she felt ready. They had allies, skills, and a sense of hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the days that followed, the community continued to thrive. The settlement grew, new structures rising to meet their needs. The group worked together, each person contributing to the common goal. Margaret felt a deep sense of peace, knowing they had built a new life. The sun set on another day, casting a warm glow over the settlement. Margaret stood with Chayton watching the sky change colors. She felt a sense of hope, a belief in their future. They had faced many challenges, but they had emerged stronger. Together, they would protect their home and build a new life. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Margaret reflected on their journey. It had been long and difficult, filled with loss and hardship, but it had also brought them together, creating bonds that would last a lifetime. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing they had found a home. The future was bright, filled with promise and possibility. Margaret knew they would face challenges, but she felt ready. They had built a community, a family, rooted in love and hope. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their journey of survival and growth. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.